All right. So, can someone quickly summarize what we talked about on um, Monday while I pull things up?
It was all about how people become like radicalized.
Okay. So, we're talking about the things that make people radicalized. Where did we leave off?
Was it the three ways of understanding radicalization, like individuals, groups, and nations?
That's it. So, we're going to go into a little bit more detail on each of those areas. And we're going to start with the individual level. Okay. So this is a chart I pulled from your reading. And it basically boils down to it's a, sorry, I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. It's a look at what people are willing to do relating to their belief. So how many of you have like followed a politician on Twitter or Facebook? That even if like you don't believe what they believe. Like I have a couple of friends who are like really hardcore like Democrat, like full blown, they say they're a socialist. They follow Trump on Twitter. Okay. So based on that, they have the exact opposite of their beliefs, but they're still doing something. So if we're talking about it from a poli-sci perspective, just beliefs versus actions, being opposed to someone but still following them on social media or sharing something would be considered what is considered association or co-traveling in this chart. Okay, basically you're associating on social media. Okay, going down further with like lifestyle adoption, think of this as like someone who anyone know anyone who's like very, very religiously conservative, like wears a particular type of clothing, has restrictions on what they eat or drink or how they act, things like that. So they're adopting a lifestyle. Okay. And what this boils down to is that, or what this chart basically says is that there is a very, very strong relationship between the strength of someone's beliefs and the behaviors that they're willing to do. Okay. So very few people, comparatively speaking, are considered like co-traveling. They're doing something without really sharing the beliefs. Okay. So you don't see a lot of people wearing Nazi propaganda without believing in the Nazi beliefs, right? It could be like they're doing it for a joke, or they're doing it to be provocative, or just being a dick about it. But most of the time, if they're like doing something related to a terrorist behavior and extremist behavior, they believe in that extremist ideology. So that's basically what this chart says. Make sense? So co-traveling, like I'll just kind of go through the chart because the readings this week get really complex. They're very structured like peer-reviewed papers, so relies on a lot of like understanding the literature as well. So co-traveling means like you're acting the same way, but you don't really believe the same thing. Exposure means you've been exposed to the beliefs, you like are okay with it. pursuit means you're increasing your beliefs, you're in the process of conversion. I guess an example of this would be like, I had a friend of mine from the military. Like, she had a crisis of faith in college, like, and she converted to Islam. Like, she was exposed to it. She met some people in the Islamic community. She started like reading the Quran, reading the tenets of the religion, and then joined the faith. Like, nothing wrong with that. Perfectly normal, whatever. But like, that's the easiest way I have to explain it. She went from believing similar things to being exposed to this belief structure to being in pursuit of it and then having full knowledge of it. Okay. Shares many would be something like, you believe most of it, but you're discounting some of it. Okay. Like, a individual of Jewish or Muslim faith who occasionally has a pork burger or a piece of bacon. Okay. Both faiths say you should not consume pork products. Some people still do. Okay. They still have their faith, but they're willing to make exceptions to the belief structure. Deep commitment would be like, I'm using faith as an example, so like, I'm just using it as an example. I'm not trying to comment or anything on it. But like, Jehovah's Witnesses will refuse blood transfusions. Okay. So someone who is deeply committed to the Jehovah's Witness faith will refuse all blood transfusions, even to the point of it risking their life, while people who believe less strongly may say, well, I don't want to die, so please give me the unit of blood. Make sense? When we go further down on the extremist behaviors side, I guess the left side of the thing, association means like, you're, I guess, using the church analogy, like you're going to church. Okay. Step above that would be lifestyle adoption, meaning you're like abiding by the tenets. Okay. You going to church consistently, you're going to Bible study, whatever. Next step down would be you're proselytizing. So anyone know anyone who like goes on diets, like fad diets? Like, they went on keto, they went on paleo. Like, did they ever talk about it? Try to get you to do it with them? Like, you see, like, I've seen a lot of memes about people who are either vegan or who do CrossFit. And the joke is basically that you don't need to ask someone if they're vegan or if they do CrossFit. They'll tell you. So they're proselytizing. They're telling you about it. They're telling you about it to the point of, I want everyone to do CrossFit, or I want everyone to be vegan. Okay. The next step down there, though, is non-extremist distancing. Okay. What that means is they don't associate with people who believe different things. Okay. So again, this is like people who don't like talk to people who aren't vegan, or aren't friends with people who aren't vegan, limiting their social circle. Okay. This is also something that's not really seen very often, because most of the time it's pretty hard to do this. Okay. Unless you live in a very isolated community or you're willing to exclude people based on certain things, you're not really going to function well in society. But I guess I should make a comment about this. This chart is from an extremist individual database. Okay. So people who have committed terrorist attacks or been associated with terrorist groups, their information's funneled into a database, and the researchers who wrote this chapter basically broke down beliefs and behaviors. Okay. So like, this chart itself is effectively pretty skewed towards people who like are willing to commit extremist behaviors. Okay. Make sense? So it may not capture everyone who's willing to, like, who has deep commitment to being a vegan and is willing to exclude people from their social circle based on veganism. Okay. Going further down, we're getting into like actual legal or social behaviors. Okay. So, like legal activism, donating to causes, lobbying representatives or the executive, protesting. Okay. Material support is like donating things, like volunteering, giving money to charities that are related to this. Same with like logistical support. This would be like working for organizations. Okay. I'm trying to think of a example here. Someone help me out. Sorry, I'm not very caffeinated. What might be an example of a politically active organization that people who have like a deep commitment would work for?
NRA.
Okay, the NRA, great example. I'm willing to bet no one who works at the NRA is against the Second Amendment. Willing to bet, right? Makes sense. They have a deep commitment to the ideals, so they will join the organization. Okay. Up to this point, we haven't really gotten into like a terrorist kind of behavior, but now we are, okay? Because people who seek specific types of training, like, has anyone watched like a TV show or a news report or read something where like you see people who went to camps in like middle of nowhere, rural areas and joined a militia? Or doomsday preppers. Like they have like gotten training on how to do a bunch of like weird things, like build fallout shelters or purify water with like scrap or whatever. Like this is where they're like going beyond just supporting an organization to learning about the particular tenets. And this is like how we used to track suspected terrorists. Like anyone like in the 90s and before September 11th, we would track people who left the United States and like went to Afghanistan and Pakistan, particularly if they were like already like if they were already Muslim. Okay. Like if you guys don't know this, I apologize for informing you, but like United States knew about Al-Qaeda since like 93. Like US government has been tracking Al-Qaeda for nearly 30 years. Like they blew up, or someone affiliated with Al-Qaeda tried to blow up the World Trade Center in 93. Al-Qaeda affiliates in Africa blew up 2 embassies. Some other Al-Qaeda trained terrorists rammed the USS Cole, a destroyer in the Persian Gulf, and killed, I think, 10 people. Like, so people who are willing to be trained by an organization or trained by an extremist group, they tend to have that very deep commitment. Make sense? Going beyond that, going beyond just getting training from the organization, working within an extremist organization in a non-combat or non-like violent role. Like there's a big thing about like in Zero Dark 30 about Osama bin Laden's driver. Like that dude probably did not kill anyone, right? but he still worked for the terrorist organization in a way that facilitated the organization. Make sense? So again, what this chart basically shows is that people are more willing to engage in extremist behaviors the stronger their beliefs. So we can predict radicalization by understanding how people learn to believe certain things, learn to adopt extremist beliefs. Make sense? So I guess I have a question for you guys. What ideology or what type of ideology is better or good at socializing people, indoctrinating people?
I'd say probably like political ideologies would be.
Okay. Can you kind of go a little bit further there?
Well, I mean, I feel like it's easy because, like, you know, I mean, our world is really split, you know, into different, you know, right wing, left wing stuff. And I feel like it's, especially like in social media stuff, like, I feel like it'd be really easy to, like, get people to follow what you believe in and stuff.
And I think that presents kind of a, I guess, a chicken and the egg problem, particularly as it relates to social media. Like, how many of you have heard that Facebook and Twitter and things like that are echo chambers? You just hear your ideas or the things you already believe. Like, Facebook shows you things that it knows you're going to engage with. Kaylin, do you have like a comment?
I was just raising the hand in there because I'm going to get in line. I think I have a chime in on the ideology
Okay.
section. But please continue.
All right. So, like, political ideologies are a great example. Like, how do you guys form your political identity? Not a rhetorical question.
It's kind of got to do with like your core values in a way.
So how do you develop those?
Part of it's like based on how you were raised. I mean, I think that it's a huge part of how you were raised actually, because I mean, if you're raised in a rural Kansas town and you just grow up with all right-wing ideologies, you're more likely to develop those. And then if you grow up in downtown New York, you know, you'll probably see more left-wing traits and characteristics.
Right. Definitely. Like, you learn your ideology from your parents. Those are the people you're first exposed to. Then your friends and peer groups, your church, or religion, whatever affiliation you belong to. Like, all of those things shape your ideology.
I feel like though it could also have like the opposite effect too.
Right.
You know, like you might grow up some way and then like that, like your friend, you said like she, you know, got a whole different like religion, you know? So I mean, I feel like that could be, you know, if you're grew up in a right-winged community and your parents were and stuff, but then you could go to college and end up hating it.
Right. Like, Kaylin, what was your comment? I don't mean to interrupt you.
The comment that I had, which ideology I think would best recruit, is I think the religious spectrum of that, because a lot of the practice of religion kind of boils down to repetition. Like it's a daily thing; it becomes your lifestyle. Which I'm blanking on the religion right now, but is it facing east every day at a certain amount or a certain time of day? To face the Mecca.
That would be Islam. Yeah.
Islam, yeah. So I mean that's a daily thing. You begin to repeat that. It becomes ingrained in your lifestyle. And I think repetition is very important when it comes to adopting beliefs or adopting their sort of viewpoint.
Like, I guess here's an example for you. How many of you guys would swear in front of a priest or swear in a church?
Probably wouldn't.
Anyone, like,
What-
when I suggested that, did anyone get like a visceral, like, oh, hell no?
Yeah.
I mean, like, that's because you have been socialized into the idea that that would be a very bad thing to do, right? Or swear in front of your grandmother. Like, it's one of those things where, like, you are socialized into not doing things. What about, like, something that you wouldn't do in front of your friends? Something that maybe you could do in front of your parents, but you couldn't do in front of your friends.
Be yourself.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Okay, it's kind of difficult, I guess, but like, there's some things like say, okay, I'm almost getting like okay, things you would do at home versus things you would do with friends, like for example, you wouldn't, weird example, but you wouldn't be able to like change clothes in front of your friends, but like if it was like a family thing, you could like change your shirt real quickly or something, you know, like something like that. Kind of, I don't know. That's the best example I can come up with.
I mean, a modesty thing, definitely. How
Yeah.
of you guys know someone who like would never willingly watch a Pixar movie in front of like with their friends, but they would 100% be down to watch it with like their family? Like the end of Toy Story 3. Like, come on, give me something. Would you be willing to watch the end of Toy Story 3 and cry buckets at the end of Toy Story 3 or the end of Inside Out? Because like you'd be willing to watch that with your family, but not your friends because you don't want to like, I don't know.
You don't want to be a sissy.
There you go.
I was going to go down that path actually, but not necessarily the movie thing. I mean, some people wouldn't be willing to cry in front of their friends because they don't want to look weak. You know, there's those groups that kind of perpetuate the feeling of, you know, masculinity or strength. They don't want to show that emotion to other people.
Yeah. I mean, everyone is socialized into gender roles to greater or lesser extent. Okay. So like this is something that like is important to understand when it comes to how people are socialized into an ideology. Like some people are socialized into ideologies and they like just run with it. Like someone who like goes to their first CrossFit class and then for the next 6 weeks or years doesn't shut up about it. Okay. So when it comes down to studying how individuals are socialized into becoming a terrorist or becoming an extremist of any ideology, like we have to understand the process. But we also have to recognize that there are some significant issues with what we know. Like for instance, the data set that the chapter 3 authors, I don't have the book in front of me, so I can't tell you who wrote it, but the thing there, like, they make clear the data is really limited. They only have information on people who have, like, A, committed a terrorist related crime, extremist motivated crime, been arrested for a terror as part of a terror group, or have been like investigated as part of a terror group. Like, what that boils down to is kind of how, like, there's a dark figure of crime. We only know about crimes that are reported to the police for the most part. There is a dark figure of terrorism because we only know about individuals who have either died committing a terrorist attack or who have, like, been arrested in the process of committing a terrorist attack. Okay? So there's a huge amount of information we don't know. Make sense? So when we take a look at moving up a little bit as to, like, what about the group itself predicts whether or not that group's going to commit an act of violence, either politically or religiously motivated. This is also very, very difficult to look at, mainly because we don't have a lot of information about political groups as they relate to violence, okay? How many do you think that a neo-Nazi group would be willing to collaborate with or, like, talk to researchers? I mean, there's really not a chance in hell, right? They're going to be like, no, you're probably cops. So the information that we do have on, like, terror groups is mainly through, like, arrest records and investigative reports. And, like, just to kind of get you guys thinking, like, how would that bias things? How would that affect things?
Well, I feel like it doesn't really like it's not a very good like representation of like how many actually how many groups there are.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great example. If we only look at groups that have been arrested, we only know about groups that have been arrested, right?
Which is probably like a really small amount.
Yeah. So again, what this kind of boils down to is we have a very limited picture. Effectively, we know about groups that have done something and been investigated, have not done something and been investigated, or are dumb and release this information to the public. So groups that have done stuff but haven't been caught aren't captured. Groups that want to do things, are planning to do things, but haven't yet aren't in that data set. And groups that are willing to go up against the edge of what we might consider terrorism, who would stretch the boundaries of what we might consider protest or political advocacy, but not quite cross the line into terrorism. We don't know much about that either. Make sense? So something that the databases themselves, like if you're interested in like research into terrorism, like some common factors that researchers have looked at are things like, how do we quantify the strength of the ideology? How do we measure the size of a group? Like, are we going by social media likes? Are we going by a roster or an email list or something like that? Understanding where they get their money and what groups that they have allied with. Like, neo-Nazi groups will often collaborate across and become effectively a large criminal network. So as we talked about previously, like, neo-Nazi groups have gotten into the drug trade, and they will collaborate with like prison gangs and other drug dealing organizations and like effectively work together. Make sense? So I have another question for you guys. How can we learn the ideology of terrorists?
We could maybe see how they measure like on a political scale,
Like, what do you mean there?
such as like if they would fall under more right wing or left wing.
Okay, so we can classify the group.
Look at root beliefs.
Okay, take a look at their root beliefs, try to categorize them that way. Trying to tell the difference between like Greenpeace and the Aryan Brotherhood. Okay, but how can we do it?
Look at what they do and who they do it to.
Okay, analyze their events themselves, terror attacks, any crimes that members may have committed. What else could we do?
It's pretty often that terror groups also make their motives known as to, dissuade certain behavior. Like for Greenpeace, like they'll probably spray paint, stop killing the trees, or doing other sort of motives of notification through the attacks, right?
Okay,
You could look at targets.
understand how they target, who they target. Anyone want to just like Google the group and see if they have like a social media page? Great thing about terrorists is they'll do things like they'll tell you what they believe. Like in the 90s, Al Qaeda released tapes of Osama bin Laden explaining his ideology and why he was doing what he was doing, and why he was encouraging people to join his group. Like full-fledged telling you what they believe. Like Greenpeace, PETA, neo-Nazi groups, left-wing terror groups, religious groups will explicitly tell you what they believe. But what does this allow us to learn? What does a terror group's ideology allow us to learn or understand?
It can hint at where they operate, probably, in the world.
Okay, can give you an idea of like where they're from, what their beliefs are. So what can you learn from that?
I guess it help us better learn like what inspires them to commit these acts.
Okay, so understand the roots of what they want to change.
It can give us a good idea of what their next move will be.
Right. So understanding what someone believes means you may be able to understand how they might do something. Like eco-terrorists are a great example. They tell you exactly what they are against. So if you find instances where an eco-terrorist group is operating, you can look for what targets are in the area. Okay. Making sense? So what we've learned from that kind of bad data that we have is that groups themselves don't really have consistent tactics over time. Okay. So for instance, going back to like Al Qaeda, they focused primarily on like really big high profile bombings. Like they bombed embassies, they bombed a Navy ship, they bombed or drove planes into Twin Towers, like really big high profile things. Then they kind of transitioned to like smaller insurgency tactics in Iraq and Afghanistan, like facilitating bombings of troops, of schools, of things like that, very like smaller scale than what they had been doing. So they changed their tactics. Okay. And the tactics themselves are not confined within groups themselves. Like left-wing and right-wing terror groups and terrorists themselves have assassinated people. They've used explosives. They've used suicide bombings. They've extorted and robbed people. Like just because a group is more strongly associated with one thing or another, like the suicide vest is pretty strongly associated with Islamist terror groups, right? It's where everyone thinks of when they think of a suicide bomber, right? But like other groups have used that tactic as well. Okay. Lee Harvey Oswald and John Wilkes Booth both assassinated US presidents in service of a political ideology. They were the exact opposite ideologies. Make sense? So when we look at groups themselves, the larger a group is, which kind of makes sense, the better funded they probably are, the more widespread they probably are. You don't have a 5-person terror group that's sitting on $20 million. Okay. What also is associated with this is that they tend to be more active the larger they are. Okay. And they also tend to work with other similar groups. And these alliances form because groups typically don't do everything all on their own. They may not have the expertise, the resources, or the understanding of the target, the intelligence. Like the intelligence as in the information necessary to commit an attack. Okay? Making sense? I'm going through this stuff pretty fast just because I want to make sure everyone understands everything, everyone understands kind of the basics. Anyone have any questions? Okay. I would definitely encourage you guys to keep going through the readings. If you have any questions, please let me know. I'm sorry I'm ending class a few minutes early. I really need a drink of water. I apologize.
Hey, no worries. I guess just one small side for the grouping thing. It's mostly because of resources, right? Like it's just these people can do what I can't, or they have money. So like you mentioned, neo-Nazi groups will join with drug cartels or drug trades for money. It's all just, it's mostly because of resources. Do we ever see any merging because of ideological beliefs? Like, would we ever see something similar to ISIS merging with Al-Qaeda and becoming under Al-Qaeda, right?
I mean, yeah, effectively. Like ISIS and Al-Qaeda like share many of the same beliefs and their members likely work together.
Yeah.
So I don't remember really the history of ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Iraq and Syria, but like ISIS kind of formed as an offshoot of Al-Qaeda. It was a group of individuals within Al-Qaeda, if memory serves, that basically said, we don't want to just blow people up. We actually want to do what we say we're wanting to do. We want to establish this caliphate, this religious theocracy.
Gotcha.
Okay, so, I mean, they effectively did. And then they all died, thankfully. Most of them died anyway.
Well, you get what you deserve.
Yeah. All right. Anyone have any questions?
That'll do it for me.
Can you talk about like this flipped classroom assignment real quick?
Sure. Basically, what I'd like you guys to do is just get into groups, however many like you decide, and pick something that's interesting to the group. And then email me to let me know like what you're wanting to do. and then we'll set a date. Okay.
Do you have that available discussion board again so we can post out if we need groups?
Yeah. I will make that available.
Sounds good.
All right. I don't want anyone to stress out about this. Like, I want it to be something where everyone can kind of nerd out about something. So if you want to take a look at a specific terror group, terror attack investigation, a like law enforcement or political tactic to root out terrorism, like by all means, go for it. The only, I guess, hard limit I'm going to have is if you're going to share any kind of media, like a video, I'm going to cap it at 5 minutes. Okay. Reason being is I don't want you guys to just decide you're going to find 5 TED Talks about terror groups and make a YouTube playlist for us, and that will be your flipped class. Like, I'd actually want to hear you talk. Cool?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. I'll see you guys next week.
All right, we'll see you then, Steele.
Have a good
See
weekend.
ya.
Yeah, you too.